We are taught that the story of mankind began in a garden, a place of perfect peace, of innocence, and communion with God. But what if that wasn't the beginning? What if the dust of the earth was still waiting to be formed, while a silent, terrible war was already tearing through the heavens? Imagine a battle that set the stage for all of human history, fought before the first man ever took a breath. A conflict so vast, so foundational, that its details were considered too perilous to be included in our Bibles. A war not of men, but of angels against giants. A righteous commander against a monstrous legion born from a celestial rebellion. This is not a myth. Faint echoes of it survive in Genesis and in the solemn warnings of Peter and Jude. But the full account, the terrifying and magnificent truth, was detailed in ancient texts that early church fathers chose to set aside. They believed they were protecting the flock, but what if they were hiding the very key to understanding our divine purpose in God's eternal plan? What they sealed away was more than just a story of a forgotten war. It was the original battle plan against the forces of darkness. If you have ever felt that there are pieces of the puzzle missing from our spiritual history, prepare yourself. Together, we are about to open the sealed records and uncover a truth that has been silent for millennia. Think for a moment about the story of Noah's flood. We are told the world had become wicked, and God chose to wash it clean. But the Bible gives a strange and specific reason for this corruption, one that is often glossed over in Sunday school. Genesis chapter 6 speaks of the sons of God who saw the daughters of men and took them as wives. From this unholy union, a new race was born, the Nephilim, giants. But who exactly were these sons of God? And why does the biblical narrative mention them in just a few cryptic verses before moving on? It's a profound mystery, a dark chapter left almost entirely unexplained. The text raises the curtain on a terrifying drama, only to let it fall again in silence. It's as if we are being shown the final bloody scene of a war, but the first and most important battles have been completely erased from the record. This is where a challenging yet illuminating question arises. What if Genesis 6 is not a beginning but an end? What if the arrival of these fallen beings on earth was not their first act of rebellion, but their last, desperate attempt to corrupt God's new creation, man? This suggests that the real war, the ancient celestial conflict, had already been fought and lost in a realm beyond our own, long before Adam was even formed from dust. The implications of this are staggering. It means the story of the Nephilim is not just a strange footnote before the flood. It is the earthly echo of a heavenly catastrophe. The key to understanding this war and humanity's hidden role in it lies not in what the Bible says, but in what it doesn't say. To find the truth, we must look to the ancient texts that were deliberately set aside. Texts that name not only the leaders of this angelic rebellion, but also the great loyal commander God first sent to stop them. For centuries, this gaping hole in the sacred narrative has puzzled scholars and believers alike. The silence is deafening. But what if the full account was never truly lost? What if it was just hidden, tucked away in texts considered too revealing, too raw for the canonical Bible? The most detailed of these is a book bearing the name of a man who, Genesis tells us, walked with God and was taken from the earth without seeing death. The Book of Enoch. It doesn't contradict Genesis, it illuminates it, filling the silent spaces with a terrifying and detailed testimony. Imagine, if you will, the pristine world before the flood. Then picture a shadow falling from the heavens. The book of Enoch describes this moment with chilling clarity. It speaks not of a random fall, but of a calculated pact. 200 celestial watchers, angels assigned to observe humanity, gathered on the summit of Mount Hermon. There, bound by a terrible oath, they abandoned their heavenly station and descended, driven by a lust for the daughters of men. This wasn't a minor transgression. It was a cosmic betrayal, a deliberate act of corruption aimed at the heart of God's new creation. Why is this detailed account not in our Bibles? This is a question that cuts to the very heart of our faith journey. Early church leaders, in councils held long ago, made a choice. They looked upon texts like Enoch and saw a truth so vast, so profound, it might overwhelm the flock. A story of celestial beings warring, breeding with humans, and birthing monstrous giants could shatter the simple, pure faith they sought to protect. So the book was set aside, the story was silenced. Not because it was false, but perhaps because it was too terrifyingly true. But their act of sealing away these texts left a critical question unanswered. As these fallen watchers taught mankind forbidden arts of war and sorcery, as their giant offspring began to devour the earth, did heaven simply stand by and watch? Did God allow this monstrous rebellion to go unchallenged? The answer is a resounding no. Before the first drop of rain fell in the flood, heaven had already declared war.
A righteous commander was chosen. A loyal warrior archangel was given his orders to lead the charge against the darkness. His name is one you know, but his true role as the first divine general in this ancient war has been almost completely forgotten. The book of Enoch gives us the answer, and it is an answer of fire and divine judgment. The Lord of hosts did not slumber. As the corruption spread across the face of the earth, a command went forth from the throne of glory. It was not a plan of defense. It was a declaration of war, a counter-offensive launched from the highest heaven to purify the creation that had been so grievously defiled. God chose his champions, the holy archangels, and gave them each a terrible and specific task. This is the chapter that was removed, the story of heaven's righteous fury. To the archangel Raphael, God gave the command to bind Azazel, one of the chief rebellious watchers, and cast him into total darkness in the desert. To Gabriel, he gave the order to turn the monstrous giants, the Nephilim, against each other in a war of mutual destruction. But to the great commander, the one whose name means "who is like God," he gave the ultimate charge. Michael the archangel was sent to bind Simjaza and his followers, the leaders of the pact on Mount Hermon, and imprison them in the valleys of the earth until the final day of judgment. Think about the sheer power of this forgotten narrative. It's not a story of God waiting patiently until the flood. It is a story of immediate, decisive action. It shows us a spiritual war fought by celestial beings on God's command long before any human prophet was called. The omission of this account from our canon has left a void in our understanding of spiritual warfare. It has made the events of Genesis 6 seem like a strange, isolated incident, rather than the final, desperate act of an enemy who had already been defeated in a war we were never told about. But if this is true, if the archangels were sent to cleanse the earth and imprison the fallen, then a critical question emerges. Why was the flood still necessary? The divine armies had been deployed, the enemy commanders were bound in chains, and their giant offspring were destroying one another. It seems the war was won, but something else was left behind. A spiritual poison that could not be washed away by angelic swords alone. A corruption that had seeped so deep into the fabric of creation that only a world-cleansing deluge could erase its stain. The version of the story we know is simple, clean, and direct. Mankind grew wicked. God was grieved. He sent a flood to wash the world clean and start anew with Noah. It's a story of divine judgment and mercy. But the account hidden within the book of Enoch tells a different tale. It's not a simple story of human sin, but the bloody aftermath of a celestial war. A war where God's holy archangels had already descended to bind the enemy and destroy their giant offspring. The traditional narrative is a quiet, solemn judgment. The hidden one is an explosive, violent prelude. So the critical question we must ask is this: why the difference? Why was the raw, detailed account of this angelic war so deliberately set aside? The answer is found in the fears of the early church fathers. They looked upon a new and fragile faith, a flock of believers who needed a clear, focused path to salvation through Christ. A story of fallen angels, celestial pacts, and monstrous giants born from unholy unions was deemed too complex, too shocking. They feared it would lead believers astray, back into myth and superstition, distracting from the central truth of the gospel. In the great councils held centuries after Christ's resurrection, men of deep faith made a choice. Poring over ancient scrolls, they decided which texts would form our Bible and which would be left in the shadows. It was not a decision made out of malice, but out of what they believed was protective wisdom. They chose to veil this terrifying chapter, to seal away the story of the Watchers and their war, believing they were shielding the faithful from a truth too overwhelming to bear. If you believe truths like these should be brought into the light, consider joining our community as we continue to uncover what was hidden. But in their effort to protect, they created a profound mystery. If Michael, Gabriel, and Raphael had already won the war, binding the fallen leaders and turning the Nephilim against each other, why was the flood still necessary? The angelic intervention had seemingly cut off the head of the serpent, and yet something remained, a stain, a spiritual venom that had seeped into the very soil, into the bloodlines of humanity itself. A corruption so deep that not even the flaming swords of archangels could cleanse it. The earth itself was crying out for a cleansing it could not receive from battle alone.
But that is not the most shocking revelation left in the shadows of this ancient story. The true horror that remained was not something physical that water could simply wash away. It was an invisible plague, a spiritual remnant of the monstrous rebellion. When the Nephilim were destroyed in the war Gabriel incited among them, their massive bodies perished. But what happened to their spirits? As an unholy fusion of the angelic and the human, they belonged nowhere. Their souls had no place in heaven and no naturally place in death. If this deeper understanding of the spiritual realm is what you seek, consider joining our channel, because the truth of what they became is a key that unlocks so much of the New Testament. And there is still something almost no one dares to say, a truth hidden in plain sight within these forbidden texts. The book of Enoch states with chilling clarity that from the slaughtered bodies of the giants, a new evil would be born. Their spirits were decreed to remain on the earth, wandering as disembodied, malevolent forces. The evil spirits that would plague humanity for all generations until the great day of judgment. This is the forgotten origin of the demonic entities that Christ would later confront and cast out. They were not just the original fallen angels, they were the vengeful ghosts of their monstrous offspring. This unveils a terrifying and critical new question. The flood was sent to wash the world clean of the corrupted flesh and the defiled bloodlines of the Nephilim. But can water drown a ghost? Can a deluge wash away a disembodied spirit condemned to wander the earth? Or did this army of invisible demonic souls simply endure the floodwaters, waiting silently in the deep, ready to torment the new world that Noah and his family would inherit? The war, it seems, was not over. It had only evolved into a form far more insidious. This is the theological key that has been locked away for centuries. The flood was not the end of the war. It was the transformation of the battlefield. The enemy was no longer a physical giant of flesh and bone that could be struck down, but an invisible spiritual parasite that needed a host. The archangels had won the first war against the Watchers, but this new war, the one against their disembodied offspring, could not be won with celestial swords. This war would have to be fought on the ground, in the hearts and souls of men. Here, we finally see the magnificent hidden purpose of humanity. Why did God create man in his own image? Why place him on an earth that had just been the theater of a celestial conflict? Because we were not an afterthought. We were the answer. Mankind was created to be God's new army, the rightful inheritors and guardians of the earth. The angels were messengers and warriors, but man was given something more profound: dominion. This forgotten history does not shrink the story of the Bible. It expands it into the cosmic epic it was always meant to be. This is not knowledge meant to shake your faith. It is meant to anchor it in a deeper, more profound reality. It reveals that the story of salvation is not just about forgiving the sins of Adam, but about reclaiming a world that was under siege before Adam ever took his first breath. The Old Testament is the story of God preparing his chosen people for this ongoing battle. Every law, every prophet, every sacrifice was a step in the divine strategy to equip humanity for a war against an unseen enemy that has haunted the world since the days before Noah. And this leads to the ultimate question, the one that changes everything. If the angels could not eradicate this spiritual plague, and the flood could not wash it away, what was God's final decisive move? He did not send another legion of angels. He sent a promise of a single seed, a descendant of Eve, who would come not with a flaming sword, but with flesh and blood. A man who would have the authority not just to bind these demonic spirits, but to crush their very origin under his heel, once and for all. That ancient war against the spirits of the Nephilim, the demonic ghosts that the flood could not drown, demanded a new kind of warrior, a champion who could stand with one foot in the heavens and one foot on the earth, an authority that could command both the spiritual and the physical realm. The final brilliant move in God's cosmic strategy was not another archangel. It was not another cataclysm. It was a promise made flesh. It was the incarnation of his own Son. Suddenly, the Gospels are transformed from a simple story of a good teacher into the climax of a celestial war. When Jesus cast out a demon, he wasn't just healing a tormented soul. He was confronting face to face the very same ancient spirits born from the giants before the flood. Every exorcism was a declaration that the rightful king had come to reclaim his territory. The cross was not a defeat. It was the ultimate act of divine warfare, where Christ, as Colossians tells us, disarmed the principalities and powers, making a public spectacle of them, triumphing over them by his sacrifice. This is the truth that has been waiting in the shadows. Jesus Christ did not come merely to forgive the sin of Adam. He came to win the war that began before Adam.
He is the ultimate answer to the Watcher's rebellion, the definitive cleansing for the stain the Nephilim left behind, and the final authority over the demonic spirits that have plagued mankind ever since. He is the Word that spoke creation into existence, and therefore the only one who could silence the chaos that sought to unmake it. This knowledge does not diminish our Bible. It illuminates it with a divine and terrible glory. It reveals the true scale of God's plan and the infinite depth of Christ's victory. Your faith is not just a personal journey. It is your enlistment in the greatest spiritual battle ever fought, a battle that has already been decisively won by the captain of our salvation. If this profound truth of Christ's cosmic victory is what your soul has been searching for, then subscribe and join this fellowship of discovery. Because the story that was sealed is now being opened, and its beginning, its middle, and its glorious end is and always will be Jesus Christ. This single forgotten truth rearranges the entire landscape of our faith. It explains the shadows we feel but cannot see, the spiritual heaviness that permeates our world. Our lives are not a simple test of morality. They are a tour of duty on a reclaimed battlefield. The struggles you face, the temptations that whisper in the dark, are not random. They are the echoes of this ancient war, the lingering resistance of a defeated but not yet vanquished foe. This is why the Apostle Paul urged us to put on the full armor of God, not for a metaphorical struggle, but for a very real conflict against the very same principalities and powers that Christ disarmed on the cross. If this knowledge is resonating deep within your spirit, it is because you were prepared to hear it. This is not a truth for those content with a shallow faith, with simple stories that comfort but do not empower. It is for the watchers, for the seekers, for those who have always suspected that there was a chapter missing from the story. The reason this truth was sealed away was to protect the flock. But perhaps the true flock in these last days is the one hungry enough to look beyond the seal. You are not just a believer. You are an inheritor of a cosmic history, a soldier in a war that has been raging since before time. Have you ever wondered why so much of modern faith feels hollow? Why the raw power that moved through the early church seems so distant today? It is because we have been fighting a war without the original battle plan. We have forgotten the true identity of our enemy. When we neglect the story of the Watchers and their disembodied offspring, we are left fighting an invisible enemy with no name and no origin. We treat demonic influence as a metaphor when the Gospels show us it is a terrifying reality, a reality Christ confronted head-on because he knew its ancient source. This revelation is not meant to bring fear, but clarity. It is a divine intelligence briefing delivered across the millennia to a generation ready to understand. It restores the missing context to our spiritual lives, transforming our prayers from passive requests into active declarations of Christ's authority. The victory has already been won, but the enemy still roams the territory, preying on those who do not know the war is over. Understanding this history is the first step to enforcing the victory that Jesus Christ secured for us all. Take a moment now and just breathe. Let the weight and the glory of this unveiled truth settle in your spirit. The silence of centuries has finally been broken. The story that was sealed away, hidden by men of faith for what they believed were the right reasons, was not meant to remain in the shadows forever. It was waiting for a generation with hearts prepared to understand the true cosmic scale of our salvation. These are not just ancient stories. They are living truths now coming into the light in our time for a divine purpose. You are part of that purpose.
This knowledge was brought to you today because your soul was searching for it, for the missing chapter that makes the entire story of God's love and Christ's victory. The battlefield has been illuminated, and now you see your place upon it as a child of the victorious King. If this truth burns in your heart, if you feel that fire of revelation that confirms what your spirit has always known, then we ask you to leave your like on this video, subscribe to the channel, and activate the bell so you never miss the truths that are yet to be unveiled. And now we have a members area. By becoming a member, you bless this work and help us continue producing edifying and revealing content like this, bringing what was forgotten back into the light. Finally, in the comments below, write where you are watching from so that we may all see how far this incredible truth is reaching hearts and minds around the world. Let us see the global family of believers who are awakening to the full, magnificent scope of the war that Christ has already won for us all.